live streamed? Yeah, thank you. Right, good afternoon and welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Caroline Karimi Govanlu and I will be chairing the Planning Committee meeting today. On the top table, we have Tracy Lincoln, myself, Lucy Palmer and Chris Rain. We are not expecting a fire drill today, but as the alarm does sound, the fire exits are clearly signed in green. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as they are not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record this meeting, please identify yourselves now. Okay, thank you. Please can you ensure that all your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent. Councillors, please do not use your mobile phone whilst the committee is in session. We will have comfort breaks if needed at various times throughout the meeting. If you must use your mobile, then please leave the room. However, you will appreciate that this could result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the time you leave the room. The order of business is as set out on the agenda. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made in accordance with the Council scheme of public speaking. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. Only people who have registered to speak will be able to address the committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, followed by questions from members of the committee to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is Parish Town Council first, followed by objectors and finally supporters. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. This will be again followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents, photographs, etc. at the meeting. Are there any questions before I open the meeting? No? Thank you. Item 1, declarations of interest, please, Lucy. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Thorpe St Andrew is within the watershed of the Broads Internal Drainage Board and I am a board member. Thank you.
Okay. And Nigel as well, be the same, won't it? Anybody else? No, thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Mear and Councillor Berry, and we have Councillor Brennan as his substitute.
Okay, thank you. Right, item 3, we go straight on to the applications. We have 4 applications here, which will be taken together under the presentation, but 4 separate votes will be taken on each application. And I'll hand over to Chris for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So, yes, the single presentation for the 4 applications. So if we just run through those very quickly, we've got Pine Banks for up to 260 dwellings, Langley North for up to 90, Langley South up to 70, and then Griffin Lane up to 130. So I'll take you through a collection of slides. Some of them I'll skip through just because we've all been on site this morning, but I've left them in there just in case we want to come back to them. So don't be too daunted by the fact it says 138 on the top. So just starting with the sites itself, just give you some local context. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you have what is kind of Langley North, Langley South, and Pine Banks as one site, and then further east down we have the kind of Griffin Lane site. And then again, just moving in so you can get a sense of the relationships between the 3 conjoined sites, Langley South, Langley North, and Pine Banks, and then the Griffin Lane at the other end. Hopefully you can see the hand on the screen. Yep, you can. And then just zooming in slightly to the site. So what you've got on there is the illustrative layout for the 3 sites. So we've got Langley South here, where we've been this morning, which is accessed off Yarmouth Road to the south. We then have Langley North in there, which is accessed off Henby Way, Hillcrest Road, and that's accessed through what would be the Pine Banks development. other kind of key features to note within that slide are just some of the significant woodland that will kind of go with the site and meet part of the open space contributions. And then this next slide is really just to give you an idea of what's gone before in terms of previous approvals. So you have the current scheme in the top left, and then bottom right is a previously approved scheme. Now, really, the only main point of difference is can you see where the hand is there on the approved scheme? There's a white hand, hopefully you can see there. So that's the approved scheme. It didn't include this area where the white hand is now, whereas now it is included. And you'll remember we went there today, so that's that kind of western extreme part of the site where there's the sort of former tennis court and the long jump pit that we wandered through. So that's just really a blown up image of the previous scheme, so I won't dwell on that. And then just to go through each site following the order we went through them today. So if we start with Langley South, so again, that's just the illustrative site. Key points are we've got access into Yarmouth Road on the south part, and then we looked at it in two parts largely this morning. So we looked at the western bit where we have the proposed apartment blocks, and then again this bit here, and then we moved inwards and then looked at that bit that had the various kind of open plateaus and that kind of stuff. We picked this up on site, but again, just for access. So the blue arrow is the vehicular access, and then the green points are simply pedestrian and cycle, and the orange one is pedestrian and cycle and potentially emergency access. And then just a more general parameter plan. So again, we have a built-up area, and this is where the plan on the north-south axis, the block of apartments was, and then another block here. Thank you. Vehicular access there again, and then we moved on to that sort of eastern parcel. And then again, this was simply to show the kind of wooded areas, and the circle is a veteran tree. And then we had this as part of the presentation package. This is just kind of looking at building heights. So on that western part of Langley South, we had kind of starting out at 3 and 4 story at the southern tip, and then that moving up towards what could potentially be up to 6 stories in the apartment blocks. And then where they were largely detached houses proposed, we were looking at a maximum of 2.5 story. And then this is just some site sections. Again, they're merely indicative, but they'll just show how the scheme will potentially work, moving kind of on a kind of north-south axis up the site. Next slide is really just to show what I think is probably one of the key issues that we'll look at in kind of summarising the scheme, but it's the relationship between that kind of ancient woodland, the edge of that, and where the apartment block would go. So I'll just go through these. Again, this one helpfully plots on where the indicative scheme would be, and as I said, we'll come on to it in due course, but it's that kind of tension between the edge of the ancient woodland, the 15-metre buffer, which is denoted by the black dashed line, and then where the properties would kind of go. And then again, some more images of that. And then this one is just some helpful visualizations that the applicants provided, but I think in many ways they kind of highlight that point and that concern about proximity, compatibility, and potentially how this development would intrude upon the ancient woodland. I'll just go through the following ones, but I'll go through these relatively quickly just because we've been on site. So these were just really photographs of the site and where they were taken from. So the next one is really just the site access, which again you'll remember from the site visit. And I think we picked up what is a kind of key feature of the access is there's going to be a right-hand turn element where you can just sort of see that hand that will facilitate access and not prevent the free flow of traffic along Yarmouth Road. And then again, that is just spinning round 180 degrees and looking back to what would be where the old council offices are. Again, this is just taken from the other side of the road of existing properties on Yarmouth Road. And then again, next set of slides are from, remember we went to the northern tip of the Langley South site where the sports hall is. So that's just some views around there. So again, I'm sure you'll remember these. Buildings are going to be demolished as we picked up on site. The trees would be retained. And then again, just the next batch are looking down. So again, all these skill buildings are to be demolished. Same. And then again, we've seen all of those. So I'll just rattle through these relatively quickly. Clearly, if there's any questions, we can come back to them. And then again, this is just looking down towards the access road onto Yarmouth Road. And then again, we're just moving towards the eastern part of Langley South. So you'll probably remember this from those kind of more open, expansive areas that you've got. Fine. So we're just in that eastern part of the site. So again, I think from when we were on site, we remember this kind of lower basin area when we had the sort of seating area there, just for point of reference. And then again, and then this is just looking at the sort of southern part of there, and we'll just sort of see some of the properties that are presently being built down on the Yarmouth Road. And then this is the final slide for this part of the site where we sort of viewed that sort of southeastern tip of the Langley South part. And you can see the properties there on screen on kind of Tower Hill that we just picked up as part of the site visit. So we then move on to kind of Langley North. So again, in terms of access points, we obviously visited Hembury Way and Hillcrest, so you would need to come through the Pine Bank site to get to this one. There is no vehicular access southwards, simply sort of pedestrian and cycle access and that emergency access. So all the traffic from Langley North in terms of vehicular would go northwards. In terms of building heights, we're looking at 2.5 across the entirety of the site, so no change there. And then again, this is just a slide to pick up a list of buildings and veteran trees. So we looked and spent some time, and I've got some images of that, of the tower. So we looked at that on site and kind of considered setting. And then we also had the bunker there, which by definition is kind of underground. And then we've got the kind of veteran tree sitting in between the two. So again, I'll just go through some of the images, but I'll do these relatively quickly because we have been there this morning. So this is kind of the kind of western side of the site. So again, you can just sort of see where the hand is. That was the former kind of tennis courts. I think they were there. So kind of south of that looking north. And then again, this is sort of slightly further east where we sort of park the vehicles up. And again, sort of kind of key features of that, some of the trees, which the scheme will seek to kind of work around where possible. And then this is just looking at the kind of northern extreme part of Langley North. And again, from the site visit, we spoke about this house. Can you see where the hand is? We spoke about just the relationship potentially of properties with that and boundary treatments and so on. And then this just pans around that kind of northern boundary. And then the next slide is really just looking at the tower. So again, we saw that on site today. And we were really kind of concerned with setting and how that might be protected as part of the scheme, and we'll kind of come on to that in due course. And then again, this is just looking kind of slightly further north of the kind of tower across the site. So we then move slightly further north onto the Pine Bank site. And again, we were just looking at that's kind of parameters planned for some of kind of the built up areas and some of the change between sort of 2- and 3-story properties. And then again, this slide really just picks up the vehicular access, which we've already spoke about. We looked at Hembury Way, which is where the hand is. And then Hillcrest Road there, which is where the hand is. Other key feature to pick up on that is you've kind of got a pedestrian cycle route through what is kind of that wooded area that forms part of the site as well. And then we've got some access through in that kind of southern part of the site. And then we've just got a slide there that picks up some of the green infrastructure. Again, we know how wooded it is around the perimeter. And again, as we took the vehicles around, we looked at kind of the veteran tree that sits in that kind of eastern part of the site. And then again, just some slides of the site. So this is kind of that southeastern tip, and we got kind of School Lane along the south. And then I think that joins around to the southeast there. And then I'll just go through these because we've seen them just this morning. So again, we're up on the pine banks. We saw all the former sports pitches and the floodlights around it. Again, there's one of the pitches in a fairly sorry state. And then again, just up towards White Farm Lane. So that image on the right, that's looking back down White Farm Lane. There won't be any vehicular access onto that, merely kind of pedestrian and cycle access there. And then we're just at the northern part, and again we looked at this mainly in terms of properties on Henby Way and one of the accesses from that, and then you've just got a view there on the right of Pine Banks and really what is a largely flat open grassed area given its previous former life as a sports facility. And then this is just looking at kind of Henby Way over the fence, but we've seen that today. And again, we're just looking around Pine Banks here, so I think we've seen that. I'll just go back. So we've just got some images now of Hillcrest Road where the site comes out, so you can see it will adjoin Hillcrest Road in that corner. We went and had a look at that today. So these are just taken from that access point, one looking northwards and the other looking eastwards. And then this is just looking at that wooded area that forms part of the application site to the east of Pine Banks. So here's just some shots. We didn't go in there today, but hopefully these will give you an idea of what it is. So this is the wooded area that affords you access kind of north and south. And eventually I think you link onto Western Avenue there. So I think certainly those three sites, that collective of sites. I think the next ones really are just looking at some of the wider views out. So these are taken from kind of Whitlingham, just appreciating the level change and what you might see. These have been provided by the applicant, so I'll just look through those as we haven't seen that today. So this is hopefully just trying to show you from Whitlingham the extent of the kind of sites. So they're helpfully coloured up. You've kind of got Langley as the blue line, yellow is Pine Banks, and then you've kind of got Langley South in green, and you can kind of just start to see some of the built areas there plotted on. So hopefully you can kind of see that there, that you've got kind of the apartment blocks we spoke about on that kind of western side. You can just hopefully see them there on the screen in green. Oh yeah. And again, some are just the outlines. I don't think they're quite as good as the last slide. And again, just a similar image there. I think probably the take-home, you can just about see some of the properties in that. Again, you can just see some of the green colouring there to a much lesser extent. Again, that would be something we'd look at in terms of any kind of final design, in terms of looking at recessive treatments and that kind of stuff. And now if we just move on to Griffin Lane, so we're slightly further east. So point of reference, we've got the mini roundabout there that takes you up to Sainsbury's, and then we go under the train line, and then the site is here. Many of you will remember the former Griffin pub that is no more, that just sits to the east, and then you have Yarmouth Road to the north. This is the indicative scheme that we've got. So again, probably the key thing we took out the site visit was the introduction of this largish roundabout on the Yarmouth Road, which will facilitate access into the site. And then again, this is to just give you some ideas of building heights. So it goes up from kind of 3-storey and that lighter colour up to 4 and then drops back down to kind of 3, and then you repeat that pattern on that eastern section there. As we've seen from the earlier slide, we have a kind of single point of access there onto the site. Worth remembering there isn't any access onto Griffin Lane that we saw when we visited the site, which is the lane to the east of the site. And then this is just looking at some of the kind of potential green spaces within the site. And then this is just a plan that picks up some of the kind of landscape and build footprint parameters. Landscape mitigation. So again, you can see similar to that, you've got properties in this kind of western part of the site, the eastern part roundabout, and then a much more kind of natural edge as you move southwards towards the Broads. That's the previous approval for this site. So we saw an earlier slide there again. I think key features to pick up, replicating the roundabout again that was taken from the previous scheme. And the build form is sort of to the eastern part there, and then this western part, and then a more kind of natural urban feel to the south. So again, very similar to what we've seen before. And then these are just some of the photographs. So given we've just been there this morning, I'll go through these relatively quickly. So this is just taken from the site frontage. So again, that's similar to where we stood and looked down the site. It's just looking back northwards. And again, I'll just go through these very quickly. So this is within the site looking northwards, and we can see kind of the office buildings and properties on Yarmouth Road there. We've got the railway embankment on the left-hand side. And then just to show you this one in a bit more detail, because we didn't necessarily go down this part of the site. So these are taken from down the properties on Yarmouth Road, where you've got kind of a small collection of commercial fish and chip shop, I think barbers and things like that. So as you can hopefully see there, you've got the site behind these properties, and we have the railway embankment there, which would kind of partially screen it, but the scheme would sit behind there. And again, you can see it there, they'd sit behind there, but obviously noting the ground falls north to south, so falling away from there, and you've got the embankment there. So I think in terms of the kind of key issues with it that you'll have taken out of the committee report, hopefully, in terms of the principle, 3 of the sites, so the ones on the left-hand side, Langley South, Langley North, and Pine Banks are all inside the settlement boundary. In terms of Griffin Lane, it isn't, but as you'll know from the papers, it's got an extant permission on it, so we've already granted permission historically. They made a valid commencement on that, and we've authorised that through a certificate of lawfulness. And bearing in mind kind of the land supply position that we're in, where we haven't got a 5-year land supply, then we're satisfied that the principle is acceptable for that as well. So if you accept the principle is a positive one for the scheme. In terms of looking through the kind of key issues, we looked at the access points today and some of the surrounding local highway networks. The application was the subject of a full transport assessment. That's been assessed by the Highway Authority, and they're in a position where they're happy with the access points into all the sites. So that's Yarmouth Road off Langley South, Henby Way and Hillcrest Road to the north, facilitating Langley North and Pine Banks, and Griffin Lane. The arrangement with the roundabout again is an acceptable one. You will note from the earlier package of information on the site visit, there are some highway upgrades off-site proposed. So the earlier image where it had the right-hand turn will go in. There's some alterations to the junction on Harvey Lane and Yarmouth Road as well to happen, as well as some other more localised ones. So with those off-site highway works, the Highway Authority are happy to support the scheme subject to conditions. Next key issue is one of viability. So we did look at it in quite significant depth in terms of viability. A full assessment was submitted. That went out for external assessment with the usual company that we use. And it was resolved that the scheme can't sadly provide any affordable housing in this instance. I think as you'll see from the papers, what officers are mindful of is that the ability to reappraise that in the future through a clawback provision. So I think at this stage we haven't got any definitive arrangement for that, because I think we need to take some further assessment on that. And that's mainly down to the fact that you've kind of got 4 separate applications and how they kind of fall interlink. So I think that's something we'll have to give greater thought to, and the report acknowledges that. But I think from officers' perspective, it's really getting that buy-in on the idea of a clawback. Next key issue is really the loss of pine banks. So as you'll know, it was a former sports facility. Where we're losing such a facility, then you would have to look to either replace it elsewhere with a like facility, or you can potentially look at, as is the case here, a financial contribution to kind of go elsewhere. So there was a contribution to be spent at the high school, previously secured under the last approval. The applicant's looking to honour the same arrangement. As you'll see from the papers, given the passage of time, that's sort of increased. So I think it was about 1.2 historically. That's going up to approximately 1.9 is the current figure. So again, we'll look to put that into a legal agreement. So officers are happy that we can support the loss of that facility with that contribution. Again, that's going to do something at the high school. Next issue is sort of landscape and visual impact. Again, we need to appreciate that it is indicative. I think notwithstanding that, we've obviously looked at the site, and I think the main sensitivity is really around kind of Langley South, and just given that scenario where you've got quite a sharp incline and how the development would sit on that. We saw some earlier visualisations of how that might work, and you can remember them from earlier. I think officers are in a position where they feel that at reserve matters you could get something by looking at design, how you treat the building in terms of external materials, such that you will get something that's kind of sufficiently recessive into the vegetation that you see. So I think we could accommodate something in that front. I think the Pine Banks and Langley North, it's not quite the same challenge, just because you've kind of got that plateau, and the development isn't quite as tall. It's just going to follow a more typical kind of 2.5-storey, 3-storey scheme. Same with Griffin Lane. I think in terms of sensitivities around that, the scheme has looked to kind of stage it from 3, 4-storey and then back to 3. So again, I think officers are happy enough with that. In terms of amenity issues, that's really looking at how it integrates with existing neighbours. I think that, as we saw today, I think when you look at any subsequent reserve matters stage, it will be possible to look to kind of secure sufficient separation distance from those existing properties that kind of share the common boundaries. So we saw some of those on the earlier slides, probably most notably on the kind of Langley North site, and to a lesser extent on the kind of the Pine Bank site. So again, I think that's something we can kind of pick up. In terms of the Griffin Lane site, the neighbour sensitivities are probably slightly less, because you've kind of got the railway line and everything else. I think you can hopefully just see, and we spoke about it, the Griffin Lane redevelopment. We've got an application in for that. I don't think it's been granted to date, but again, we're happy that we can put sufficient separation distance in to kind of safeguard what will be a kind of residential scheme. Next issue is really one of heritage. And I think probably the key one is the tower. So we saw that on site, and we discussed kind of the need to think about its setting. And I think the idea is that you can kind of see it here where the white hand is. The tower is in that kind of location. And what the indicative scheme has sought to do is really kind of retain views of it down this kind of north-south axis. So again, it's only indicative, but it shows one way of looking to kind of achieve that. And I think that's something we pick up again at reserve matters. So I think in heritage terms, we're comfortable with that. We have the bunker again. That's an underground one. So I think again we can look to deal with that as part of the reserve matters detail. I think that's probably the key challenge on heritage. I've just put a note there about nutrient neutrality. So as you're aware, that's an issue for us. What the applicant's looking at doing, but hasn't done yet, is purchase credits. So they've been in contact with NEC to do that. So that will deal with that. We have sort of more general issues around kind of water quality and capacity at Whitlingham. wastewater treatment works, which I'm sure you're aware of from other applications in this part of the district. Again, we've kind of got a joint position on that across South Norfolk and the city, and I think from our perspective, as it says in the paper, we don't think that's such a significant concern that you could object to the application on that. I think the slight nuance with this scheme on this point is because of the extant permission that is applicable to these sites, there would be a threshold whereby you could build up to that in any event, which is quite an unusual scenario, but I think more generally we're not too concerned about it. And then just on a kind of final point, kind of ecologies in trees. So I think we spoke about in the report, there's an awful lot of ecology information on that. They've gone through the point where there's been a backwards and forwards with that, and I think we're kind of comfortable with the information that's kind of come in. In terms of kind of trees, I think certainly for Langley North and Pine Banks, hopefully you've got a sense today from what would be an acceptable relationship between development and the trees, and I think hopefully you understood that it's largely perimeter stuff, and you can kind of work and you can kind of see that some of the scheme indicatively seeks to kind of look and be outward facing towards those trees, so you're not putting undue pressure on those in kind of Pine Banks, as you can see there, and then the kind of Langley North side. So I think in that sense that works quite well. I think in terms of Griffin Lane, the same's applicable, albeit it hasn't kind of got the same sensitivities. I think that the main concern around one site in particular, as you'll see from the papers, is really just about Langley South and how this part in particular of the kind of western scheme will kind of work in the context of how it relates to the ancient woodland, this idea of compatibility. So not so much whether you can physically build something within that gap that causes concern, because I think you can. It's really just about kind of compatibility and looking at that kind of 15-metre buffer, all the things that go with residential occupation in terms of people occupying them, potentially having cars, lighting outside areas. So I think it's that kind of concern that really bothers the officers, and that kind of feeds into the recommendation for the Langley South one. So I think in summing up, as you'll see from the papers, officers are happy in principle as part of an outline scheme to support the Pine Bank scheme, the Langley North scheme and the Griffin Lane scheme, but it does have concerns around that kind of compatibility on Langley South, and particularly the western part of that site that we went to first today. So the Langley South one is recommended for refusal on that basis of compatibility. What you'll also see is, because we need to make a decision on that, and we haven't got the credits secured, and we haven't got some other bits and pieces, there is more than one reason for refusal, but some of those are addressable on there. So, yeah, we have three recommendations of approval and one for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Does any members of the committee have any comments for the officer? Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, really disappointed that we haven't got any affordable housing in this scheme. Really surprised, actually, because I don't really understand why the affordability is an issue, because a lot of it is very open, standard, buildable sites. So can you just explain a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I kind of said in the assessment up to a point, I think it isn't something that officers have sufficient kind of expertise at considering. Hence, we send it out to an external consultant to look at it. I think it's probably fair to say that went through quite a significant backwards and forwards, and it included getting some additional support from kind of an independent surveyor around some of kind of the costings and that sort of stuff associated with it. So I think in that sense, we've done as we do with all of these kind of things, of take the expert advice on that. I think I guess to sort of echo where you are from an officer perspective, we're always concerned, disappointed, whichever way you look at it, about if there is a sort of shortfall in affordable housing, or it ends up at zero. And I guess the point is, what do we do when it's in that scenario? And I think in terms of this one, that's why we've got the kind of clawback recommendation in to look at kind of retesting it in the future to see whether there is ability to kind of secure something on the back of it. So that's as a consequence of, does it secure more value than you're predicting through the viability appraisal, or are the costs slightly less, or something like that? So I'm probably not in a position where I know enough about viability to sort of say, well, there's this bit, there's that bit. I think the key bit for us is, have we tested it with the right people? Yes. Are we trying to put something in place so that if it does turn out to be more positive than is being predicted at this time, that we have the ability to potentially claw something back? I think that the challenge with this around clawback is, because you've kind of got numerous applications, that you then don't know which one will come forward first, or does one not come forward. Then it's how you manage that, because we haven't got any examples of where you've got that challenge. So I think what the assessment is seeking to say in there is, look, do you buy in as members to the idea of having a clawback? And if you do, officers will have to kind of go away and take some input on what that will be. And clearly, officers, as much as members, would want to see it deliver something if possible. So I think that's the kind of direction of travel on it. But yeah, we need to give it some thought, because it's quite unusual, because you've got 4 separate applications that you then have to look at how the legal agreements work with each one. And then again, you can't necessarily control which one comes forward first, or in what order, and who's going to do them, and how you do it. So that definitely needs some thought.
So this viability assessment, it's done for each site.
From memory, I'm not sure which way around they did it. I'd have to check it. As I say, it's one where we get the viability in, and it goes to the people who know more about viability than us. Now, clearly, they're in a position where they're looking at it from trying to support the council's position, which is one where you want to deliver affordable housing if at all possible. So I think it's one of those ones where I'd have to check it. I don't know off the top of my head.
Anybody else? No? Okay, we'll go straight to, thank you, Chris, for the presentation. Go straight to public speaking. We have Councillor John Fisher, please. John, if you'd like to come to the front. John, you have 5 minutes from when you press the right-hand button.
Okay, good afternoon. Madam Chairwoman, I was going to call you Chair, but I've changed it. I'm John Fisher. I'm representing Town Council, Thorpe St Andrew. Thank you for allowing me to address the meeting today. I'm speaking on applications 2021/2558, 2059, 2060 and 2061. You'll see that at the end of section 4.2 on page 22, marked further consultation or reconsultation, the Town Council raised no objections to the applications actually being considered here today, but did raise 4 concerns. Feature of the ancient monuments, sports hall contribution, impact upon ancient woodland and the affordable housing. We're pleased to see that the feature of the tower, that was covered by the officer as well, the aspect has now changed so it's more visible, and the conditions relate to the proposals to protect the tower and the World War II bunker. The sports contribution is now secured at 1.9 million, as described to you in paragraph 525, page 84, and we thank the officer because we know he had a lot of persistence in able to achieve this, and we were concerned greatly that we were going to lose that contribution to the school. Affordable housing, we think, is fully explained on section 513 to 516, page 82, And the council policy, the government guidance, the viability carefully explained, and the conclusion that clawback provision as section 106 wording keeps the door open for further contribution. And we support this position locally because our knowledge of this particular site, all 4 sites, we consider to be difficult and expensive to develop. The Pine Bank site is difficult, obviously the tree site, and we've also got the benefit of the 29 acres of woodland and marshland that will be protected and improved. There's not been a great deal of work going on with those over the last certainly 20 years. Section 421, page 71 covers response by Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and here I declare I am a member, and at their local council meeting on 23rd of March last year, the trustees agreed that the trust would enter a 30-year lease agreement to restore and manage the woodland and the fen habitats, and we're, as a town council, we are pleased to see that now in hand and protected. So we fully support that move. They currently, we're familiar with the Wildlife Trust because they currently manage the part of Thorpe Marshes, which would in fact join the marshes down Bungalow Lane. We fully acknowledge comments by the Woodland Trust. I have to state also I'm a member here too. Section 425, page 73. However, we believe that involvement with the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, with their very robust attitude to conservation and wildlife protection, the Woodland Trust fears we think are unfounded. And Norfolk Wildlife Trust, we feel, with others, we know their background, they've successfully opposed the Western Link, and if that doesn't prove how robust they are, then fine, you make your own decision. But the indication of 29 acres in safe hands, in our opinion. Mature trees are protected from the future pressures. Although I know you've looked at the site this morning, and there are some mature trees there along Thorpe Ridge. So in conclusion, we hope you'll support the approval of applications 258, 2059 and 2061 as proposed by the officers and outlined in pages 102 to 106. But we also ask you to consider the approval of application 2060, which is Langley South, adding suitable conditions. The other 3 applications have got about 40 conditions, and we believe that if suitable conditions were added to 2060, then with the subject especially engaged in the Wildlife Trust entering into a 30-year lease, we believe that would be beneficial, and by agreeing all 4 sites at the same time, we believe we'd be moving on faster to get this developed and also to actually protect those trees. Development on these sites.
Excuse me, John, your 5 minutes is up.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it goes very quickly, doesn't it?
It does. In fact, I thought I'd got it nicely timed, but...
Is there any members of the committee? Joe?
Thank you, Chair. John, I just wanted to ask you, before it was Pine Banks and before Langley School, what were the past uses for this land? I don't know if the Town Council knows that. And also, why do you think the development hasn't come forward before? Because obviously the school and Pine Banks has been closed for a considerable amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you. The Pine Bank site was originally landfill. It was used by Bolton and Paul aircraft before and just after the Second World War. So that it is, they don't know what they're going to find there when they start developing. And we know there's been a couple of other developers in the past do soil tests and land tests, and we feel that might be why we're in the position where we are today after about 15 years, and it's only now coming to the thing. And then I say from that, it was then I think sports used by Norwich Union from the 50s through to 2008. What was the other question you asked? We think maybe they've been a bit ambitious. I mean, town council wise, we have, of all the applications that have come in since 2008, we've supported some and we've objected to others. This particular one, because of the numbers, they have drastically reduced the numbers from 725 to 550. We think now, across the 4 sites, it's time to move ahead.
Anybody else on the committee have any comments? No? Okay, John, you may return to your seat, please. I'd like to call Sachkia Quelch and Meltzia Friend. Is that how you pronounce your name? Sachiko. Not Melissa. Would you like to come over, please? Yeah. You have 5 minutes each. Again, just press the right-hand button when you're ready to speak.
Good afternoon. I'm speaking in objection to the updated draft application. I live at 3 Yarmouth Road in the 2-storey house immediately next to the Langley South site. I want to be clear from the outset, I support new housing here. In principle, however, the current proposal causes clear planning harm. The proposed 4-storey block is not on the footprint of the former school. The original building sat alongside my home, and in this scheme, the building has been pushed forward onto the former school playing field, making it far more prominent. Its height and massing are excessive, and its rear windows, even with the buffer zone mentioned earlier, would face directly into the front of my home, resulting in clear loss of residential amenity. Turning briefly to the playing field issue. Some comments online suggest this land was not a school playing field, and I'd like to draw your attention to the image before you. This shows the land qualifies as such as a school playing field under section 77 of the School Standards and Framework Act 1998. Claims online saying that this protection lapses after 5 years is incorrect. That 5-year reference comes from Sport England's consultation policy and not from statute. Under section 77, any land that has ever been used as a school playing field cannot be built on without the consent of the Secretary of State for Education, and that protection does not expire. The council should then please confirm whether this consent has been granted before determining this application. Now turning to height and overbearing impact. The proposed building is 16.8 metres high, rising to 23 metres at its tallest point, and this is more than double the height of any former building on the former Thorpe House School site. As shown in the aerial photograph before you, all buildings...
Sorry, you cannot show any documents.
Were 1 or 2 storeys. The former sports hall, the only structure of uncertain height, would have been around 10 metres at most, and therefore comparable in scale to a 2-storey building. There is no established height precedent on this site for 4 or 6-storey development. I believe the applicant seeks to justify this height by reference to the Pine Banks Tower on Langley North and to taller buildings along the main Yarmouth Road into Norwich. Neither comparison is valid. The Pine Banks Tower was an isolated feature on a separate site, not a benchmark for overall scale or massing. The roadside apartment buildings address a primary route into Norwich city centre. Langley South is a contained interior site with a very different character. Height that may be acceptable on a main road frontage does not automatically translate to a site like this. To argue otherwise would be like approving 4-storey housing in a 2-storey street simply because a church spire exists in the distance. Planning precedent must relate to the prevailing scale and character of the site itself. I urge councillors to be cautious of so-called worst-case arguments intended to pressure approval through fear rather than sound planning judgment. I respectfully ask that you request modifications to reduce the building height to 2 storeys and to move it back to the established building line. This would deliver much-needed housing, but in a way that respects local character, residential amenity and planning policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for the speaker? No? Okay, if you'd like to carry on, please.
I'm here really to discuss the access from Pine Banks and from Langley North. When the original Henby Way estate was passed, there was a covenant put on that because it's on an old gravel pit that was filled with things that they deemed needed a covenant because of the weight of traffic going down that road. That covenant was retracted in 2016. We're now in a time where we have electric vehicles, where we're having to build different bridges, different car parks, because their weight is that much greater. The only people using that main drag would be 75 houses using the main Henby Way drag at the moment. So if we say double that to 150 cars, with this development, you're going to be doing exactly the same. You'd be looking at perhaps an extra 350 cars going along that road, 233% increase on weight on that road. What's going to happen if the road collapses? If the road collapses under the weight of all this extra traffic going backwards and forwards, I don't know what numbers we've got for those. We did hear the numbers, but then we got lost a bit this morning going to them with the numbers for the Langley South, which seemed very low. We were told 200 cars an hour when they were schools, which seems really high per hour, going down to 30 now with 70 dwellings. I'm very concerned if they're going to say there's going to be less than 350 cars coming in and out of that entrance quite frequently, that perhaps the algorithm has been used, which is for Norwich City. We are a town, we are not Norwich. If we were in Norwich, the traffic would be very different. How many cars people would have would be very different. We're now in a situation where the nearest primary school with vacancies is Rackheath. We cannot walk small children to Rackheath, so everybody has to have a car. Also, we have got access from Langley South. Yes, and I agree, having a right-hand turn in is good. The turn out needs to be sorted as well. Perhaps putting a roundabout there might be a much better idea. If they're putting a roundabout at Griffin Lane, it might be a better idea because traffic will not get round there. You have to also think about the amount for the school. It's great to have that extra budget going to the school, but will that not only attract people from the school rather than Pine Banks was an independent thing? It wasn't as though you were going into a school. Going to the Langley south where Tower Hill join, there is a barn there which we were told was going to be demolished. It doesn't seem to appear on any of the plans. It didn't appear on the plan we had today, which looks quite old. It's slate roofed barn, and I just wonder if there is a preservation order on that, because that's where they used to store the carriages when the schools were in operation quite a few years ago. So it's just quite worrying that that hasn't appeared, and I was asked to put that question there. I think that was about all, but it's just a worry about the traffic. And like I say, I couldn't put the question to the expert on traffic as to how many he thought would be coming from these extra sort of 350 houses that we're going to get coming out of Hillcrest. We have all the driving schools use that area, we have buses use that area, and we have houses now parking on the road because they've extended their houses. So I just don't think the traffic area will take it. The Heartsease roundabout recently has gone to single lane. The other day when I left at 6 o'clock, they were queued back to Thunder Lane to get to the Heartsease roundabout. If you're increasing traffic flow by that much, nobody's going to move on that side. You were all late this morning because of the traffic. And that's now. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? No? Okay, you may return to your seats. Thank you very much. Right, I'd like to call Stephen Chatfield, Hannah Leary and Mark Topping, please. If you'd like to speak individually, and then after each speaker, we'll ask the committee if they want any clarification. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Planning Committee and public. I will address all 4 outline applications combined. My name is Stephen Chatfield. I represent Occubus, with the development managers for the applicant Burlier, outline planning applications for a 550 home residential development in Thorpe St Andrew. We welcome the recommendations for approval received from officers in their committee report and acknowledge the disappointing Langley South recommendation for refusal, which was made clear to us very late in the process. My colleague Hannah Leary will cover that site in more detail shortly. Nevertheless, these proposals have been 5 years in the making, so we're delighted to be meeting with you today. As you may know, Pine Banks and Griffin Lane have implemented planning permissions for housing and allocations in your local plan. Langley South, Langley North, Pine Banks are previously developed brownfield land with significant existing development platforms and buildings. We intend to bring that brownfield land back into use. Thorpe St Andrew has a population of 14,500 people and is part of the priority area for development due to its sustainable urban fringe location within proximity to Norwich and close to amenities and public transport links. All are set out within the Greater Norwich local plan. In the terms of the timeline for applications, we consulted widely with the community in May 21 and submitted our outline applications to the Council in November 21. We continued to engage with key stakeholders and subsequently submitted updated proposals in November 22. The number of homes was reduced from 725 to 550, representing a near 25% reduction. We also decreased the massing and overall heights across all 4 sites, and the proposals mean that more than 52% of the site area will remain undeveloped. In building houses, we want to build vibrant communities. A development at this scale provides a fantastic opportunity for local economic growth. The construction of 550 homes will create jobs, both directly and indirectly. Furthermore, these new residents will increase demand for local businesses, whether it's retail, hospitality or other sectors. Payments of 10 to 11 million through CIL and Section 106 will contribute towards community facilities and infrastructure, including 1.9 million towards the Thorpe St Andrew School. Due to Thorpe St Andrew Town Council having an adopted neighbourhood plan, 25% of the CIL will be passed directly to them. We've taken a responsible approach to development to make sure it's sustainable, both in terms of its environmental impacts and long-term resilience. A fully funded 30-year woodland management plan ensures necessary improvements are carried out to secure the woodland's long-term future as a wildlife reserve. Norfolk Wildlife Trust have expressed an interest in taking on the custodianship of the woodlands once fully restored. If all 4 sites are consented, the area under their management would total 23 acres. We're also delighted to report that the vast majority of the trees across the 4 sites will be retained, but suffice to say there will be a small loss, mainly of the lowest quality category C trees, totaling just 3%, which is a very small percentage for a scheme of this nature. All veteran trees and woodlands are fully protected. Following the adoption of the Greater Norwich Local Plan, a biodiversity net gain assessment has been completed to confirm the proposals will provide a combined sites, an individual site, 10% increase in biodiversity. At Griffin Lane, we're funding the restoration of the marsh, a new pond dipping platform, car park and footpath, which will enhance accessibility to the Thorpe marshes. I'm just going to jump to a few comments on affordable housing, which I've just noted down following the comments made earlier. You're probably all aware that in London, emergency measures have been applied by the GLA to stimulate housing delivery and affordable housing delivery because they recognise it's a national emergency. There are a lot of headwinds facing developers at the moment. For us on this site, when we reduce the number of homes from 725 to 500, that obviously impacts viability. We've got a lot of abnormal costs, nutrient neutrality, the school contribution, CIL, infrastructure, the big roundabout, we've got the landfill on Pine Banks, we've got proximity to trees, so you've got deeper foundations. There are a lot of costs, and obviously post-COVID, costs have increased. I haven't got a precise number, not a QS, but let's say 30%. You know, the costs have absolutely rocketed. Values, on the other hand, have stagnated. So again, from a viability perspective, developers are up against it. but you'd expect me to say that, wouldn't you? They are. So anyway, going back to what I was previously going to say, a conservation management plan has been developed alongside Historic England and a local conservation officer to guide the future and long-term management of the Grade 2 listed Thorpe Tower, scheduled monument in-station bunker and the World War II tank traps at Griffin Lane. As Chris said on the walk round, we've received our listed building consent for restoration works to the Thorpe Tower, and the Town Council have expressed an interest in taking on the long-term stewardship of the tower and the in-station bunker.
Chatfield, you had your 5 minutes, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I will hand over to Hannah Leary.
Thank you. Is there any questions first for the speaker? Joe.
Thank you very much, Stephen. You talked a bit about the 23 acres of woodland that will be under the stewardship of the NWT and Woodland Trust. It says in the papers that will be fenced off from the public, just to stop it being, you know, too much deterioration. And there is a fence that's going to be 1.8 metres high. Is that on all of the area around the woodland, or is that just in part?
It will be around the ancient woodland. It's a chain link fence, black chain link fence, so it's quite recessive when you look at it. It will be raised off the ground to allow wildlife to get through backwards and forwards. People will be able to go in the ancient woodland with the Norfolk Wildlife Trust if they're volunteering to help the stewardship of the ancient woodlands, but to keep the sort of general dog walking, get people out and try and get rid of all the invasive species, so the rhododendron, the laurel, things that were introduced in the Victorian era to bring it back to what it should be. And an interesting statistic actually is that in the UK, only less than 7% of ancient woodland is actually in good condition. And the reason for that is it's not looked after. It needs to be looked after, because if you don't look after the ancient woodland, the mature trees mature, there's lots of light to the floor of the wood, so you've got no succession of new plants and trees growing. The wildlife as well hasn't got anything to eat. So there needs to be stewardship of the woodland to keep it alive. People think wrongly that if you just leave it, biodiversity takes over, but ancient woodland's different, and Norfolk Wildlife Trust understand that better than me, so they're the right people to deal with it.
Hannah, would you like to carry on?
Thank you. Planning applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The proposals accord with Policy 2 of the GNLP and are generally supported in residential development terms under Policy GC2 of the Broadland Development Management DPD. The NPPF makes clear that permission should be granted unless other policies in the framework provide a strong reason for refusal or the adverse impacts would outweigh the benefits of the scheme. Stephen's already highlighted the benefits to be delivered by the schemes, and your office's report sets out those benefits and how they'll be secured. In terms of impacts, the applications are supported by a robust EIA, which demonstrates that any impacts can be fully mitigated and how. 2 of the sites benefit from extant approvals for residential development, as you've heard. All 4 sites are within the urban area and are in sustainable locations and are largely on previously developed land. Sites such as those before you are exactly the sorts of sites which can help towards achieving the government's 1.5 million homes target and help your council to work towards demonstrating a 5-year housing land supply, particularly in the context of the fact that an additional buffer will be added to that target next year, increasing that pressure to deliver. In terms of the report, we would draw members' attention to the following key points. Members' comments as set out in section 4 of the report generally refer to the original 725 unit scheme and not to the scheme you see before you today, which is for 550 units, the reduced number. The schemes are in outline only. The officer has concluded that the parameter plans submitted provide sufficient clarity to enable an RMA, a Reserve Matters application, to come forward. This is important as it would be unreasonable to make assumptions about how a future scheme may come forward based on the illustrative master plans or subjective views of what a future design could look like. When considering the Langley South site and the relationship of the proposed development to the ancient woodland, members are reminded that, as seen on site, The western part of the site is occupied by existing buildings of considerable bulk and height, formerly occupied by the school. These buildings are already located in the 15-metre ancient woodland buffer to which the report refers and are coexisting with the ancient woodland. There is a very limited buffer zone to the ancient woodland at present. The new built form on the site would be further away from the edge of the ancient woodland than the school buildings. The development therefore extends the buffer pulling back from the existing development footprint. There is no policy that requires the removal of existing built form and the re-establishment of an undisturbed woodland as a starting point before new development proposals are considered. Whilst the illustrative master plan does not form part of the application, it's worth noting that the master plan takes the built form further away from the edge of the ancient woodland. In respect of shading, the site is south-facing, and whilst there will be some shading at some times of the day, it's not accurate or reasonable to conclude, in the absence of a detailed design scheme, that a scheme would be in shade for the majority of the day. It is possible to design a scheme that has adequate levels of daylight and sunlight to dwellings and amenity spaces. Your officer notes in his report at paragraph 5106 that the applicant put a series of proposed controls to the council which could manage and mitigate pressure from residents for works to ancient woodland trees, but these are discounted. For members' information, those controls included a condition to embed the woodland management plan into the permission and ensure the ancient woodland is properly managed for its own benefit. Any tree works would be in accordance with the woodland management plan. Any proposals to do works that deviate from the woodland management plan would need your council specific consent. A section 106 obligation which could ensure residents are aware when they're purchasing a property that the trees are in close proximity and consent for tree works will not be forthcoming. A section 106 obligation which could create a covenant on title that prevents residents applying for lopping, chopping or crown reduction. The trees are in a conservation area. Again, your council can therefore refuse permission for works. Your council could include the first ring of trees considered at potential risk from residents wanting tree works in a TPO. This would again add an extra layer of protection. The residents will not own the land on which the trees are located. The land will be fenced, as we've already discussed, and on a long lease or owned by the Norfolk Wildlife Trust. So even if a resident obtains an approval for tree works, they'll still need landowner consent to go onto the land to do the works. We've taken legal and counsel's opinion in respect to the concerns in relation to the impact of lighting at Langley South on ecology and the risk of the destabilisation of the banks around the site. And he's confirmed that there's no reason why lighting and proof that any works will not destabilise the banks cannot be the subject of an appropriately worded condition. And members will be aware that the PPG makes clear that refusing planning permission on a planning ground capable of being dealt with by conditions risks an award of costs, where it is concluded that suitable conditions would enable the proposed development to go ahead. Lastly, should members be minded to accept the recommendation and refuse the Langley South scheme, they should do so being aware that the area of Langley South currently included in the Woodland Management Plan, which is in poor condition, would no longer be the subject of that management plan. The increased permeability for pedestrians and cyclists would also be lost, and there will be a reduction in the number of homes being delivered, which in the context of the lack of 5-year housing land supply is a significant consideration.
Sorry, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Stuart.
Could I just bring back to your comment, re the Langley South site? It was interesting and I think relevant. You mentioned about the buffer zone, the 15-metre buffer zone between the trees and any potential building, which is fine. You said that there was the possibility, and again, this would obviously have to be sorted out between yourselves and officers, the relationship with the trees and the buildings, the dwellings, could be sorted out potentially through a legal agreement, a 106, in terms of management and maintenance. Perhaps you'd just like to expand on that a little bit, if you could, please.
Yeah, of course. And I may need to just refer to my notes again just to talk through some of those potential proposed controls. But yeah, during the discussions around the relation to the application on Langley South, we put to officers a series of potential controls that they could apply to the application, which would help to alleviate some of the concerns that have been raised during the process of negotiation in respect of the application. And those have been discounted, which is why I've read through them just for your own information, so you understand what those potential controls were. And I'm happy to go back through those again. But in essence, there are a series of potential options which could either be applied through the Section 106 obligation, or which could be used by your own council to protect some of the trees within the site, or could indeed be applied via the application of covenants to the site, again in relation to the title. And also, you know, the other point being, as I mentioned, that the trees are in a conservation area and therefore you have an additional level of control. And again, there's also the question of the trees within the ancient woodland that surround the site being outside the ownership of anybody as a resident who's living within the Langley South site, and therefore they wouldn't necessarily have the right to go onto that land, as it wouldn't be within their ownership to undertake any tree work. So even if they had permission, they couldn't actually physically undertake those works without that consent.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up on that. That's very interesting, and I would regard that as constructive. So, in a nutshell, you would be prepared to enter into those types of agreements with the council through a 106, through legally binding agreements, to ensure that those necessary, you don't need to rehearse them again, but those necessary protections are put in place.
Yes, that's
Yeah, that's fine. Because looking at it, again, if I've got this wrong, please tell me, but 15 metres, roughly 50 feet, yeah? Approximately 49 feet? Okay. Well, now I just say that because it's a reasonable distance. I mean, we've got areas within the district where we've got trees where residents effectively can't work on them, which are in 12, 15 feet of houses. So I believe with the right negotiation, a robust enough arrangement in terms of what you alluded to, 3 layers of protection, which again you've clarified you would be happy to enter into, I think and believe the necessary protections can be in place. Thank you.
Got Paul next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Chris, can you bring up a slide that you've got of Langley South showing the 15-metre buffer? Because you said, I believe, that you said that you were going to be further away than increasing the distance between the trees and your potential building. And the plans that we've got seem to suggest that they're getting closer to the trees. So maybe you can just clear that up. If you get the plan up, maybe the plan's wrong, I don't know.
You've got a further question, Paul?
No, sorry, thanks, Chair.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Mr. Mulhare? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is John Mulhare. I'm the transport consultant for the applicant. I just wanted to clarify a few points that have been raised on transport in the last few minutes. In particular on Henby Way and the Pine Banks and Langley North access points, on Heartsease roundabout and then Langley South access. In terms of the overall transport assessment that has been done for all of the sites, it really has been a detailed and robust traffic modelling assessment, 29 junctions in total in a significant study area, and we've worked really, really closely with Norfolk County Council, who have interrogated the models, and we've had several meetings with them that have gone through the conclusions. The conclusions that we have made, Norfolk County Council have agreed that with our analysis, which concludes that the development can be accommodated, that the external highway network does have capacity to accommodate the additional traffic. And it's important to note as well, in terms of the comments that were made about Henby Way, obviously there are 2 access points for Langley North and Pine Banks. There's a secondary access on Langley North, so there is a dispersion of traffic. It won't solely be on Henby Way. The issues around Henby Way and the concerns have been raised before, and we have spoken to Norfolk County Council about them, about the condition, and they did not raise any concern regarding the condition now or in the future. They were satisfied that the road widths were sufficient to accommodate the traffic volumes. In terms of the Heartsease roundabout, the changes to the Heartsease roundabout occurred in the last few years when our assessment was being undertaken. Another point that we raised with Norfolk County Council, they liaised with the people that were doing the updated designs and confirmed that the traffic from our development had been included within their analysis for the upgrade of that junction. And finally, just on the Langley South axis, there were some queries regarding that and retention using the existing access points. I think it was highlighted earlier that a right-hand turn bay is being provided on the highway, so it's as to avoid any blocking of westbound traffic on Yarmouth Road. A sightline assessment has been undertaken of it, showing that vehicles leaving the property have safe sight and stopping distances, and two-way flow is possible with passing opportunities. I think the point was raised about the school previously, which we surveyed before it had stopped functioning. That showed at its peak 200 vehicles in an hour. That's in and out, so 100 cars dropping off students and leaving. The numbers that the 70 dwellings will generate are 35 vehicles in a hour. The peak hour, which is 8 to 9, which is a fraction of the previous generation. So that in itself, again, Norfolk County Council were satisfied that it can accommodate the future traffic. I think that's everything I just wanted to.
Any questions to the speaker? Ken?
Has any thought or any consideration been given to solar panels?
Is the highways man?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that question in terms of solar panels.
That will come at reserve matter stage, but suffice to say, if I can find my notes, that the new National Future Home Standard for energy efficient homes will be introduced this year. It's been delayed, it was due to come last year. So 80% less carbon emissions compared with current levels. Move towards net zero as electricity grid continues to decarbonise. So without any further energy efficiency upgrades to the homes, and heat pumps will become the primary heating technology. And the goal is to minimise energy consumption for residents, reduce carbon emissions and create sustainable low impact homes. So almost by default through the building regulations, almost the way homes have got to be built in the future will be a significant improvement on homes that were built, just recently.
But no consideration.
Not right, no, but there will be, there will need to be, because it's an outline planning application at this stage. We wouldn't be getting into that level of detail.
Thank you. Anybody else on the committee before we? No? Okay. Thank you. May return to your seats. Thank you. I call Councillor Peter Berry, please. Peter, I think you know the procedure by now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Berry, the Broadland District and Town Councillor for Thorpe St Andrew North West. In 2008, when Aviva closed Pine Banks, a venue that had been used and much loved by people of Norfolk and Norwich for decades was lost. For the intervening 18 years, residents of Thorpe St Andrew have endured uncertainty as to the fate of the site. In 2013, two schemes totalling 231 houses for Griffin Lane and Pine Banks were put forward, which, although far from popular, are more acceptable than those we see today. Indeed, over 1,500 people signed petitions and protested against the original scheme. The traffic assessment carried out in 2013 bears no comparison to the new proposals, with a 52% increase in properties and traffic over that which had earlier been measured. Anyone who lives in the area surrounding Gordon Avenue, Hillcrest Road, Avenue Green Estate and the various feeder roads off Gordon Avenue will have experienced an increase recently in traffic volumes and antisocial parking on roads, which makes any proposed increase, let alone nearly 10 years of construction traffic, an unacceptable prospect. I know from conversations that agreements to give access via the cul-de-sac of Henby Way would not have been given if the reality of the scale of these proposals had been made clear earlier. A commitment previously given by Burlier to employ 100 unemployed local residents into good jobs and deliver over 500 plus career opportunities for students from local schools and colleges has now been dropped as well. as well as the unacceptable pressure on local existing infrastructure, i.e. schools, dentists, doctors and road system that was not designed for the volumes proposed, there is one other totally unacceptable factor. When the original proposals, and indeed this proposal, were submitted, much focus was made on providing much needed homes for local people. Indeed, the Griffin Lane element and the Pine Bank scheme were accepted that they would contain affordable housing as per the original Section 106 agreement. This is not only a planning but a moral requirement. We now see properties in these schemes that there are none of these type of properties in this scheme. In December 24, the new government pledged to build 1.5 million much needed new homes. Schemes like these in Thorpe St Andrew do not help those desperately trying to get on the property ladder or put a roof over their families' heads in rented accommodation. A gentrified group of proposals as these only help those with the financial good fortune to purchase higher value housing. Other developers in our district and in Thorpe St Andrew have been able to include an appropriate element of affordability in their plans, so why have Burlier ignored those on the first step to home ownership? I draw your attention to the NPPF paragraph 50 for inclusive mixed communities. It's a requirement. We can all agree that something needs to be done to bring new life into Pine Banks and Griffin Lane. There is great potential here, but this is a one-off opportunity to get it right and provide a legacy for Thorpe St Andrew for years to come. We're only the current custodians. So I urge the committee to refuse these applications as they stand, because as they stand, they are a wasted opportunity to help present and future residents. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter. Any comments or questions for Peter? No? You may return to your seat. Thank you. We'll open for discussion. Stuart.
Yeah, can we ask Chris, please, just if we could explore the affordable housing, in other words, zero affordable housing, the viability assessments and the potential for off-site committed sums for this. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more, because I think we need to bring a little bit more clarity to this, because we've got potentially a split in the developments, but then again we're sort of looking at them as a whole, which I don't have a problem with, but I do sort of see that at this stage there does not seem any guarantees, first and foremost, for affordable housing. But secondly, I think you look at it, the report alludes to it, but I don't believe effectively there is robust and rigorous enough guarantees to deliver a committed sum which could potentially benefit the local area in terms of development of affordable housing. So if I could ask you to just address that, Chris, or have a look, tell us a little bit more about this, because I just don't think it's adequately covered at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, really, I guess it goes through a couple of stages for officers. So where someone is saying, look, it's not viable, we're going to challenge that and say, well, prove that it's not viable. And I think, as I said earlier, from the officer's perspective, that's one that goes out externally to people who know more about viability than me to kind of test. Now, clearly, they're looking at it from a perspective of trying to maximise what might be delivered from a site. So I think it's fair to say they do challenge the robustness of any argument that's put forward by the developer. And I think, as I said on this one, it's one that did go backwards and forwards and actually also included some further external testing from kind of independent surveyor to look through some of the kind of cost side of it. So I think from our perspective in that kind of first issue is, look, the applicant's come forward and said it's not viable. We've said we'll prove it. We've gone through that process, and the person who's best placed to decide that has said, look, their argument stacks up. There isn't the ability to deliver affordable housing based on the viability model. And planning policy allows councils to take that into account, and you as a member who's been on committee for a good while understands that and kind of knows that. Now, I think in this instance, once you go past that, there's the argument of, well, look, you've gone through that exercise, it can't secure it. Is there your ability to look and think, well, will it secure it in the future through this kind of clawback exercise? Because we're just making a prediction on the basis of what we think will happen. So we don't know, and as the applicant kind of said, if you go back, things have gone up in price recently in terms of building materials quite sharply, but values probably haven't at the same rate, and there's other things around that. But you don't quite know what will happen. So what a clawback allows you to do is kind of retest it in the future and see whether what is now is quite a pessimistic position becomes less pessimistic. And we don't know whether that will be the case or not, because we don't know when the scheme will come forward. All you can do is grant permission for something. It doesn't mean it will necessarily happen. And this is a great example of that, because it had permission for a decade or something like that. So I think the challenge on this one, as it says in the report, is that because they're separate applications, it's understanding what a clawback will look like across 4 separate applications. And I don't think we know what that is yet. And that's what the recommendation picks up, that if these applications do go with the recommendation to approve, officers will have to go away and get that input from CP Viability, who did the viability, as to what the legal agreement will look like to ensure that we retest it in the most robust way to try and see if it does deliver a value. I think that's all I can really say on it at this stage, that it's a 2-stage process. Have they demonstrated it's not viable? Yes. Do we look at a clawback? Yes. What does that look like? We're not quite sure yet, but we want to get something in there. I think from your perspective, it's whether you, speaking as an officer, it's whether you kind of allow us to go away and do that exercise and just deal with it, or ultimately whether we go away and do that exercise, get to the point where we're happy with it, and then whether you bring it back to members to say, look, this is what we've done, are you comfortable with it as the decision maker? I think that's probably the key takeaway for me. As I say, I can't say what it looked like yet, Stuart, because we've not done it.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I mean, I recognise a considerable and substantial decrease in the numbers, which has gone towards a recognition of what needs to happen. But I do feel, other members might want to follow up on this, but I do feel it's essential to ensure a more specific outcome for the viability assessment. I think how you answered that, Chris, there's no disrespect, but it was worrying.
I think, as Chris has said, we've had our own viability expert look at this, and it's the case of, do you trust the officer to go back and sort something out? Yeah. Ken?
Well, just following the last point, will the assessment be made overall or on each separate site? Be worth considering that it should be on separate sites, because if not, it could be manipulated.
I think that's exactly where we are as officers, to be fair, Ken, with it. I think it's understanding how the 4 sites interact, bearing in mind you can't control if they say they all got approved, which we're not recommending they do, so in some respects you'd have to factor that in anyway, but you can't control, do they all get sold at the same time? If they get bought at the same time, do they all get reserved matters approval? Because they've all got to get further approvals. This isn't the end of it. What comes forward then? Do they all start at the same time? So there's lots of things there's lots of variables you don't necessarily know, and that presents the challenge, going back to kind of what I said to Stuart about it, that you don't quite, we don't know what it's going to look like yet. I think what we want as officers is kind of, as it says in the assessment, it's just buy-in that you agree there's a need to have a clawback, which I'm sure you all do. But as I say, what that looks like, I can't say to you, and I think that's the decision in some respects, that if you went with it, Are you comfortable with us just going away and doing it with input from the people we need input from, legally and from a financial perspective? Or do you want us to do that and then bring it back and say, well, look, this is what we think for these 4 sites, 3 sites, whatever it is. And then you can say, well, yeah, I think that's robust. Or if you said, well, I don't think it's robust, there's gaps in it or whatever, you could say, I don't think it's robust, you need to think about it in more detail. So I think that's something to weigh up as you kind of go with it, I think. But no, we're not going to secure something we don't believe is robust. But equally, if you wanted to get an understanding of what that finally looks like, then I think it's within your gift to do that. There's no concern with that.
Okay, we'll go to Adrian, please.
Just want a quick clarification, because earlier on in the presentation you said the viability assessment. Do you know if it's done as a whole or for each individual application? Is there assessment for each application or as a whole?
As I recall, it was as a whole. It was done as a single exercise because it's put in by the same applicant.
So when we come then to do the clawback mechanism and look at these, we'll be able to legally do it on a site by site basis. Is that possible?
I think that's, as I say, in terms of constructing something, we haven't got any particular details on that. As I understand it, we'll be looking at having a legal agreement for each of the planning permissions. So if you do that, you'd have to look at whether you try and tie them all together for the purposes of viability, or whether each one has its own viability. Again, I'm not quite sure which one that would be at this stage, because I've not made a decision on it, because I'd need to take some external input. And I think that's where, as I said, are you happy for officers to go away and work out what's the best? Because what we'll do as officers is we're going to take input to get a scenario that optimises the ability to do it, because that's what we would want to do. We don't want to get we don't want to get a scenario that's not optimal for us. We don't know whether it'll deliver anything, whether it won't. So I think that's kind of where we are with it.
I think my view would be I'd want to see the outcome from the officers' negotiations, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So what I'm hearing is, and so we can kind of resolve in terms of whether that is brought back, what you are saying is, in terms of that review mechanism, you would expect that to have a mechanism to test each individual application to ensure the calculations are based on those and how they will come forward, potentially separately, maybe together, whatever that looks like, rather than as a single piece. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to violently agree then. I think I'm just going to add in that what Peter said really was that, you know, we're looking for mixed communities here, and I think having some clawback perhaps that we could spend on the sites and and try and make some of these houses a little bit affordable for local people, I think is really important, because that's what helps knit these communities together, having families close to each other. So, you know, if we do get a clawback, I'd like it, if possible, to be spent locally and done on a per site basis, per planning application basis. I think that's the only way you can do it.
Just going to pass over to Tracy for legality.
So just trying to clarify, so what, in terms of what that proposal is, I think what you're saying is the clawback must be tested for each site. So planning application, there's a strong preference to spend locally, so look at the kind of what those cascades look like. What I would be suggesting is that is still a resolution to grant subject to the details set out in the report. However, we'll be adding the details of the section 106 will need to be reported back to the committee to be finalised and agreed prior to grant.
Is that okay with the committee? Yeah? Okay. Adrian.
Moving on from that one, just a quick talk about Langley South a bit. So there was mention of conditions around the trees and stuff that the applicant mentioned. So I'd be quite keen if we could get them in there on that application. Also, is there anything we can do around, my biggest concern is around on the west side of the site, the height of those dwellings. Is it possible to put any conditions or limitations on them at all, or not?
Yeah, I guess picking those points up. I think in terms of some of the things put forward by the applicant, I think officers looked at those and I guess to a degree appreciated the sentiment of them. I guess the concerns of the officers are whether it'll transpire that they'll actually work, because you have the scenario where if you try to do things like that, it then doesn't potentially stop people seeking to do it in the future, and things can become changed, and how strong your argument is to resist that. So I can see where they're seeking to go with it. I think the concern would be that we just become the architect for our own downfall by people applying for stuff that we then can't subsequently resist. But yeah, as I said in the presentation, I think it's one where, can you physically construct something? Yes. But I think the concerns are about kind of compatibility. And as I say, I think going back a bit to the second point that Adrian makes, it's almost, well, look, it is an outline and the drawings are only indicative, but equally you have to look at the quantum of development they're trying to get in terms of numbers, and whether, I don't see any way you can kind of, for want of a better phrase, shuffle the pack on that kind of site to kind of achieve something. So I think you kind of are slightly where you are with it, and I think that's what we're working to. I think going back to the sentiment about, I don't think we are necessarily pinning too much on what we see before us, because it is indicative, but equally, how much can you change it? Again, so I think you have to look at it in that sense. Can something be achieved on that bit of the site? Yes, it can, I think. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but I think looking at the quantum and what will be an arrangement, I think it's difficult to see it looking anything like what you've got and looking at what you've got. So, yeah.
I think I would agree with Chris on that. Personally, I've got no objections to any buildings on that site, but I think the bulk and the height of that building is not sympathetic to the area where it is. I know yourself, Stuart, you know Tavern Park. Something like that would be more suitable to the area. Yeah. Jo first, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say I agree with Tracy, what she said on the clawback. I think that's very, very sensible to have that clause put in. But I just wanted to talk about the Langley South site. It seems that Thorpe St Andrew Town Council are now in favour of the application. The Broads Authority don't have any problem with this application, and they did mention that it should have some sort of dark cladding. As long as nutrient neutrality and GIRAMs can be satisfied, and we can't demonstrate a 5-year land housing supply, I actually think we should move to approve that application. I don't have a problem with the western end of the site. We stood at the end of the sports hall. There was just sort of garden shrubs around the end of the sports hall. There weren't any significant trees particularly per se. And actually we were in a little bit of a ravine there, and the trees were on higher ground around the end of those buildings. So I don't have a problem with a 6-storey building at the back there at all. We know that the site actually sort of faces down towards the river to the south, so I think actually it could be a very, very nice place to live. And I've just had a look at Thorpe St Andrew town plan, policy 1 in protecting and enhancing the natural environment. Obviously, this, if we go with approving all 4 sites, a significant amount of really ancient woodland is going to be managed in the correct way by the Norfolk Wildlife Trust and Wildlife Trust, and I think that's a very significant benefit for the whole of Thorpe St Andrew. And we've heard about the link fence and wildlife being able to pass underneath. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I also think by approving that, that would concur with the MPPF section 15 paragraph 187, conserving and enhancing the natural environment. So I would like to move that we approve all 4 sites. Thank you, Chair.
I think I would disagree with you there with the bulk of the building. Plus, you've got to remember you're going to have car parking around it as well and amenities. I still don't think it's suitable, that area, but I'll pass on to you. Stuart.
Yeah, can I just make a similar observation to? I think we could overcome on the Langley South, we could overcome the tree issues, I think with proper conditions, and with the 106 worded accordingly. I think that could be managed to give residents options to do appropriate crowning, pruning, or whatever's necessary. I think that can be overcome reasonably, constructively, and easily. So I think that's a big plus. I think the principle of development is sound. I think it's sound on the Langley site, and I think we've heard that the town council support it as well. However, the only observation I would agree with the chairwoman, I think when we're talking potentially, I mean, it's a little bit again vague, and this is what concerns me with outline applications. They're vague and they turn into fact when they become reserved matters application, and that's worrying because we see that too often. And with all due respect, officers come back and say, "Well, you approved this at the outline stage, and we don't have any further where to go." So the principle of development on Langley site sound. Trees can be overcome. Yes, I don't mean overcome, but there can be necessary safeguards put in there. But I think the principle of, it's a big difference, 4 or 6 story buildings. Is it 4? Is it 6? And again, I am very, very reluctant to approve things at outline stage with this high level of ambiguity. We think we've maybe bottomed it out on viability to try to get something more, greater clarity and more, well, clarity, that's the word. And I have no problem really of approving the south site, Langley South, and I would be supportive of approving it. But I do have reservations, what the chairwoman, Caroline, has alluded to. 6 story is going to be overpowering in that area. It's not going to be right, and it's not going to be in keeping with the appropriate local amenity infrastructure, car parking facilities, small brick walls and whatever. That's really going to work. So if we could get that a little bit better, if we could get that, in other words, at this outline stage, not so overpowering, I would concur that I think, yeah, there is merit in approving this, but I am also, and I do hope this can be minuted, I am very, very reticent to approve applications at outline stage which get bounced back at us at reserved matters. By the way, members, you approved that, and that is not right.
If I can just clarify then, so you have an application in front of you where the matters of scale are reserved for a reserved matter stage. So what you are only considering is the number of units on the site. And as Chris has set out, when exploring what an indicative scheme may look like, how that development may come forward, because we have to understand that is the site big enough to accommodate the number of units that's been submitted? And that's where that challenge lies in terms of where Chris is saying it's difficult to understand how else you would shuffle your pack in terms of fitting that many units on the site without going up to the heights that you're looking at. So I understand what you're saying, Councillor, but in terms of if the members were to approve the application, you are approving up to those numbers of units, and therefore you are likely to get a scheme that reflects the indicative plan that you've got in front of you. We wouldn't be in a position to be able to roll back from that significantly. Yes, we still have to consider whether it meets all of the reserve matters criteria, and just because it's got a grant of outline doesn't mean that we can't refuse something at reserve matters if it's unacceptable. You are establishing the principle of up to that number of dwellings, so you need to be comfortable that you can reasonably fit that on there in accordance with your policies. Now, if you are saying, and as Councillor Coppleston is saying, well, actually, I ascribe less harm to residential amenity and less harm to the ancient woodland because you believe that conditions in Section 106 can control that, but you believe there's less harm ascribed to that, and you're giving significant weight to housing delivery, significant weight to the benefits, and you're balancing that, that's absolutely fine. But that is making a decision around the principle of the numbers. Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you. Point of order. So we're outline planning permission here for 70 dwellings, right? Is there any scope for reducing the number of dwellings, or is that you know, can we say I think 60 would be more appropriate. Is that something that we can do?
If you give approval, you're saying that you accept 70 dwellings on that site. Now just remember, yeah, up to 70 dwellings. And remember, there's 70 car parking spaces as well on that site. Do you think that site would accommodate that? I don't think it would, personally.
Clarify, you can't, as a committee, change the description of the application, so you determine the application in front of you. So it is up to that number of dwellings, but you can only really roll back at reserve matters where you really absolutely cannot fit that number in, and there's an adverse impact in relation to the reserve matters that are outstanding to be determined. So you do have to be broadly comfortable that that number is broadly acceptable. You couldn't suddenly say, well, actually really only want 30 and therefore we're going to accept 30 at a later stage. You can't roll back from that significantly.
Yeah, I think based on everything that's been said, I think there is a general consensus that we're reasonably happy with Langley South, but I think I can't speak for colleagues on the committee, but I'm not happy with the effectively giving the nod to 4 to 6 stories, because there's a big difference. So the 4-storey or 6-storey, could be 5-storey, I agree, but that's in my view the sticking point. I think quite logically, again, if I was how can I say, the developer, I would be happy to try to get an approval for these 4 sites altogether, because it's gone on a long, long time. And again, overall, I think it's a good proposal, a good plan. But the sensible and pragmatic way would be to do some negotiating, to look at the 4 to 6-storey properties, look at, as you've alluded to, Caroline, that the car parking facilities, the hard landscape, whatever around that area could be negotiated to potentially reduce the numbers slightly. Of course, this then brings into play the viability assessment, so that's going to be reasonable and fair and decent to the developer. It reflects, would help the local residents, some of the comments they've made about height and block, etc., etc. I think there's a sensible compromise to be done, and I think we could then potentially approve all 4 sites, because I think the other things can be overcome, the trees, the buffer zones, that can all be overcome. But I just feel that, you know, for us to sign 4 or 6, it's either 4 or 6. And Tracy, as she rightly said, well, you're accepting that as the principle. So we're actually signing up to 4 or 6. So is it 4 or 6? It's not right. You know, we must get these things right, because if we don't get them right, it comes back to haunt us. So my view would be that we're reasonably acceptable Langley South, subject to just getting that bit sorted out.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Yeah.
I mean, I think only in some respects, just to reiterate, I mean, I guess it's one of those ones where whether you I go back and have a discussion with them post the meeting, I think, and you choose to defer it on that basis. I mean, again, it's you looking at the board as members, I think. I mean, it's a legitimate option. I can happily have a discussion with them. It's up to you. I mean, I think the other bit within your point is just what they are 4 separate applications, so you've got to vote on all 4. So whether that one's just left and the others aren't, I guess it's one for you to have a think about.
I think there is an option to approve it, but I think we need clarity, because we cannot and must not approve these outline applications and then they come and haunt us back at the reserve matters, because it's not 4, it's not 5, it's not 6 stories. We're talking about 4 to 6. Now, if you can get some form of agreement which can be basically appended to this, I'm personally happy to approve that application, because I think everything else can sensibly be overcome and to the benefit. Again, there's a linkage here to the viability, and I'm agreeing with that, Chris, because the numbers will reflect the viability, will reflect the cost, will reflect the return on investment. So all of those factors are relevant, but I also don't think they're insurmountable, but we have to make sure we have greater clarity at the outline stage.
If I can just come in and try and, I guess, play back to you what I guess I've heard in terms of what does that look like for a member proposal. That's sounding to me like you defer the application to further negotiate the application. My only concern is that obviously we've had this application for some time. Obviously the applicants have worked out what is clearly a viable scheme for them, and I'm not convinced we're going to come back with much different than is being presented to you. If you want clarity around scale, then obviously we haven't got an application in front of us that is including scale, and the applicant's not required to do so. Again, that may be a challenge to be able to come back to you to demonstrate that. So I guess you're either saying it's unacceptable because of whatever those harms are, and you refuse the application. So you can defer the application, but and we can seek to try and get further clarity, but I think that it's just going to add further delay. I'm not sure we're going to come back with anything different. And I'm sure I'm looking at Chris, I'm sure that's a sentiment. Chris has obviously been involved in this application with the applicants, and I know they've certainly looked at how to, which is why we've got a much reduced scheme in terms of housing numbers already. I'm not sure we're going to see much different in terms of what's being presented. Chris?
Yeah. I mean, I think just to go back on what Tracy said, I mean, I guess it's one where, I don't know, I'll happily have a further discussion with them. It may well be the case, as to what Tracy said, that a lot's gone before and there's not so much wiggle room, but I mean, I'm happy to do that and see what it is. I mean, I don't see we'd lose a lot necessarily by doing it and bring it back.
Yeah, I got my microphone on now, thank you. Perhaps we could have a section 106 obligation that when we came back at RMA stage, the maximum number of units for Langley South was 60 instead of 70. Is that going to help people in this room? Because if it does, then we'd be happy to do that.
I don't know personally, I don't know why this discussion, but that part of the site to me is too bulky, is too many units there. And discussion if it's 70 or 60 is irrelevant. To me, that's too bulky. We need less units on that section of the site. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was only just going to talk about the practicalities of it. I'd be, not to say it isn't right or legally sound, I'd have some reservations about having a description that said up to 70 and then the legal agreement that said maximum of 60. I mean, it's not technically incorrect because 60 is less than 70, so it's up to. I think if you were going to do that, and it's easy to get around, you would just have to do a reconsultation on an updated description of development to align the two together, I think. So I think that would be my only concern, that you would have to make, I think you'd want to make the two the same. But
who was first? Adrian?
I think it's what Tracy said. I agree a bit with what Stuart said, and probably Joe. I think, in principle, I agree with development on this site. I think it is doable, but I think, you know, proving something here with the outline of up to 70, is setting us up for problems further down the line when it comes to reserved matters. So I'd be of the mind to defer this, and also listen from the applicant. The applicant was saying they were a bit caught out short notice around the refusal on Langley South and some of the reasoning behind that. So I think if we deferred it and had some further negotiation, we could come back with a scheme that members could approve.
Well, I would slightly disagree with you and say I'd rather get it done now. It's been hanging around this. I think just to defer it again, it's been deferred twice. We just need to get it sorted, really. I personally would be happy if it was 60, just because that gives us the confidence that it's not going to be 6 stories, 4 stories perhaps, maximum across the board would you know, in my mind, make it a much more manageable area.
I guess we've got a number of proposals on the table, and I think we just need to then work through what proposals we've got and what have been seconded, because obviously we've got a number that have been presented. Just in terms of this deferral, if that is a proposal, I think, or 60, 70, I think that would be safe to do. If you are concerned around that but still want to support the scheme, I think it would be a deferral to allow us to look at the numbers. I think just saying 70 to 60 won't mean next stories. We can't guarantee that, so we'd need to have a look at that. So if that is the case, then that would have to be a deferral. I would want to understand really just when you're seeking to reduce numbers, is that because of the reasoning from officers around the impact on the ancient woodland and impact on future residents of the properties, or is that around potential overall building heights? Is that the key kind of concern? So I would, if we're going to defer, and then we can certainly come back to that if you vote on that, and if that's resolved, I would just want to understand what that deferral looks like, so it gives the officers the best chance of doing something that actually is going to be acceptable to you. But yeah, that would just be my advice on the deferral. But I think we've got a number of proposals on the table that we think we just need to work through.
Can I just say that I would be supportive of that deferral. I don't think we're pulls apart. I think realistically we are moving towards an approval, but I don't think we can take arbitrary numbers, 60, 70, whatever. That's not fair to the developer, and in fairness, that's not fair to the planning officer. It's not fair to, because we have requested the planning officers to look at the viability assessments. That's going to be very relevant, and in fairness to the developer, they're going to need to do their calculations. So a sensible option would be that, you know, we're minded to approve this application, but we don't like the scale and the bulk, and we aren't prepared to approve something with that level of ambiguity, 4 or 6, because that's too ambiguous. And as I say, it does come back and haunt us, because you'll say, well, actually, we want them all to be 6. And if you remember at the outline stage, the approval was 4 to 6, and that isn't right. So I think for all parties, in terms of the developer, the proposer, I mean, they have quite logically wanted to link this proposal. I think we're all happy the tree issues can be overcome. We're all happy about access issues. I think that they're reasonable, but I think there's been some quite understandable and reasonable local objections to height and bulk of these this particular area. And I think you yourself, Caroline, has alluded to, you know, the ancillary build around that area is going to be quite a lot. So I think there's room for some sensible negotiations. We also have heard from the applicant, quite logically, they want to get this approved, and they're going to go back and get their calculators out and their consultants. They're all going to be working very, very hard to make those figures stack up. But that means our officers have also got to work very, very hard to make sure the viability assessments stack up. So I think we're moving to the right direction, and I would support that deferral on the basis of you suggested.
Thank you. Right, before we go to any vote, anybody got anything else to say?
Sorry, are we voting for a deferral, Chair?
We're going to go one at a time through. When it comes to that one, okay? Paul, did you want to say
I was
something?
just going to point of clarification. I think, Tracy, you asked why we're worried. I think it's just agreeing with Stuart, really. That's the height of the buildings in relation to the setting of it, you know, biodiversity and the tree and the street scene. It doesn't fit in with the street scene that's there. So that would be my opinion.
Yeah, I'd be looking for something a bit more sympathetic to the site as such. Okay. Right, we're going to go on to... Let's do the first one, can we?
Yeah, we'll see which one's
Okay, can we concentrate? We're going to go to application 2021 2058, which is Pine Banks. Right, the recommendation is to authorise the Assistant Director of Planning to approve, subject to conditions and to the completion of a Section 106 agreement for affordable housing clawback, travel plan bond, open space, shortfall, financial contribution, GIRAM's contribution, self-build provision, and for details of the 106 to be reported back to the committee. You all happy with that? Those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, that's passed. Right, the next one is 2021 2059 Langley North. Do I need to read the recommendation out again? It's the same as before. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's passed. Right, 2021 2060 Langley South. We'll go for the officer recommendation first, which is to refuse on the grounds as it's stated on page 104 and 105. Those in favour of refusal, please raise your hand. Those against? Okay, so yeah, so right, we've got a second proposal to defer this application. Do we have a proposer? Stuart, do we have a...
Subject to negotiation as agreed.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll second that.
And Adrian seconded it. All those in favour of deferral, please raise your hand. All those against? 2. Okay. And the last application, 2021 2061 Griffin Lane. Again, as I read out before, authorise the Assistant Director of Planning to approve subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement for affordable housing clawback, travel plan bond, open space, shortfall financial contribution, GIRAM's contribution, self and custom build provision, and for details to be reported back to the committee on 106. All those in favour of this application, please raise your hand. Okay. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. we have any? Anything else, have we? Okay, I close this meeting at 4:15.